We reported last week 3.28 million Americans filed for unemployment benefits. But as New York Magazine's business columnist Josh Barro noted, that staggering figure is only going to grow. In February, there are 158 million Americans working, according to the Bureau of Labor and Statistics.
But with all the businesses closing from the economic shutdown and related ripple effects, we're going to continue seeing more and more people filing for unemployment. And Josh joins us now via Skype to discuss all of this. He's also the host of KCRW's Left, Right, and Center. Great to see you, Josh.
Good morning.
Morning.
What do you think people should be prepared for in terms of folks filing for unemployment benefits and overall numbers of unemployment?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to go up a lot from here. If you put that 3.28 million number in perspective, I mean, obviously it's huge. It's about 5 times larger than the previous record number of initial unemployment claims in 1 week. On the other hand, that's about 2% of American workers. And if you look around at all of the disruptions to the economy, obviously this thing is going to put more than 2% of American workers out of work. The high-end unemployment estimate number I've seen from James Bullard, the president of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, is 30%. I think that's a little bit pessimistic. Some of the assumptions that he's making, that he and his analysts are making to get there, sort of assume shutdowns of whole categories of labor, very few of which are going to go to truly 100% of workers out of work. To take one example, I mean, they're looking at workers who require close physical contact. And so like physical therapists is a profession that's assumed to go completely out of work. But I actually know several people whose physical therapists are using telemedicine to do physical therapy. So I think that, I think we're probably going to see something in the teens. I don't know exactly where the number is going to go, but it's going to go a lot higher from where, this 1 week number, that's only enough to push it up close to 6%. So I think it's going to go much higher than that over the next few weeks.
And Josh, we're in a strange position where we don't necessarily want the number to go down, because the fact that the number is growing is actually a result of social distancing and of public health policy. So how should we think about the numbers in that context? I mean, it is a tragedy in one hand, but it's also a success in the other, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think we should expect that unemployment will get very high over the next few months, and I think that that's a reason that the relief bill that just got signed by the president includes such generous unemployment benefit provisions. It enhances unemployment benefits essentially so that if you make typically up to about $50,000, the number varies from state to state, all or even more than all of your income will be replaced by unemployment benefits. So the idea is that yes, a lot of people should be thrown out of work by this as a virus prevention measure, and we need to support people through that. I still think, it's good to find ways to keep people working. If jobs can be done remotely, we certainly want employers to be shifting to remote work rather than laying people off. Some of the provisions in the relief bill are designed to encourage businesses to keep employees on their payroll, even if they're closed, providing them necessary financial support to do that. So that's those people won't show up as unemployed because they are still working. And there are certain sectors where we do want people to keep going to work. Obviously, we want healthcare workers to continue working. Certain kinds of necessity retailers are going to continue to need their staffs. So we want it to be possible for those firms to retain their workers. But yeah, I think that the planning here needs to be that a lot of people are going to be temporarily unemployed and they need financial support through that.
So we're obviously not the only country that is dealing with all of this. How does our response compare to other countries, and have other nations done a better job of containing some of the economic fallout?
I don't think it's clear yet. I mean, Canada, like us, has done a very large expansion of unemployment insurance. I've seen a lot of memes going around on the internet saying Canada's sending everyone $2,000 a month. That's not true. Canada has enhanced its unemployment benefits. So those are, that's the $2,000 a month. You actually have to lose your job. Much like here in the U.S., the enhancement here is actually $2,400 a month. So I think some people sort of have this image that other countries are just, sending huge checks to everyone, which is not really true. You have some countries like the United Kingdom and Denmark, which are taking an approach where they're really trying to keep people on company payrolls because by the government just paying company payrolls or paying a large fraction of them. The government will pay 75 or 80% of the company's payroll. I don't think there's anything inherently wrong with that approach. I think in putting together this bill, it was really important to focus on doing things that you could due immediately. Congress needed to approve the money, and then you needed a way to actually get it in people's hands. And that can be surprisingly difficult. These checks that are going to basically every American adult, or every American adult making less than about $100,000 a year, it's a logistical challenge to get those in people's hands. The IRS has some people's direct deposit information and should be able to get some of those payments out very fast. But other people may be waiting a while for a physical check in the mail. So you don't really want that to be a problem with your primary payment system, especially for people who have lost their jobs and really need the money. So leaning on unemployment insurance because we have an existing system to send checks to people who've just lost their jobs, I think was a smart way of ensuring that the money could get out as fast as possible. Whereas if you wanted the government to start picking up the cost of payroll at companies, you need to figure out how our company is going to get that money from the government. Are tens of millions of large and small firms going to be signing up for a new government program to process those payments, and how long would it actually take to get those out? So I think that leaning on unemployment insurance was just a smart, safe way to do something that we know the government is already set up to do.
Right. And Josh, I know that this is passed, but I thought you had a great take on this, which is that the initial objection by some of the Republican senators was that these unemployment benefits would be basically too good and incentivize people not to work. Why did you find that misguided or as an objection?
Yeah, well, so when I first heard this from the senators, I thought it was a crazy thing to be worried about. As I got more detail about the bill, I still thought they were wrong. I didn't think it was crazy anymore. I mean, basically, their concern is not only did unemployment benefits become a lot more generous, they also became a lot easier to qualify for. You don't need to be laid off to get these unemployment benefits. If you had to quit your job for various reasons related to this crisis, including, for example, that your children's school closed and you have no other person to take care of your children, then you are eligible to get these unemployment benefits. So normally you would say, well, people can't will themselves into being laid off. They can't quit and take unemployment. In this case, some people actually can quit and take unemployment. And while we want effectively there to be a significant amount of unemployment during this period, there are certain kinds of businesses that we do want to retain their workforces, grocers, for example, and hospitals. And so I think that it's not crazy to worry about their ability to retain workers. What I would say is that that some people might be inclined to not work and take these benefits. Other people, I think, will reasonably look at it and say, well, these benefits are for 4 months. And if the benefits run out in 4 months and the job market is terrible 4 months from now, which is likely, then I'll be stuck without a job. So I think that in a situation where you have unemployment in the high teens, you don't need every available worker to be willing to take every job. If there are a substantial number of workers out there who are saying, I don't want to take the job, I want to receive these benefits, there's a zillion other unemployed workers out there who can take the job instead of them. I think people have mentally gotten used to the tight labor market. We don't have a tight labor market anymore. The labor market is suddenly very loose. Yeah. So I don't think that's something you need to worry about now. If they need to extend the unemployment provisions, which I think is possible, 4 months may not be enough, that would be a time to think about fine-tuning the formula a little bit more when we have more than a week of lead time to set it up.
Well, and I think people are starting to wrap their heads around the fact that it is not going to be weeks, it is going to be months before we can, let up on these lockdown orders and start to restart the economy in any sort of a normal way. I think there's a lot of optimism that things are just going to be able to bounce back to normal that to me doesn't seem justified. But what do you think about that, Josh?
Yeah, I think that Ron Klain, who ran the Ebola response in the Obama administration, had the right way of thinking about this, which is that the right question isn't when we can reopen. The right question is how can we reopen? And then you figure out what you need to do to get yourself in that position. It's not just a matter of stopping the epidemic and sharply reducing the number of new infections. We also need new strategies to be able to contain the outbreaks that will pop up again. We need much more testing and surveillance so that when you have a handful of cases, the government's able to quickly figure out how all these people got infected, trace their contacts, tell people to isolate themselves if they need to, test them rapidly and figure out who has it. So if you set up that infrastructure, that puts you in a good position to reopen. That's obviously something that takes some time to stand up. I think the people are also making a bit of an error of thinking of reopening as a binary switch. I think we are not going to be seeing concerts for some time. There are certain restrictions that are likely to need to be in place until you either have a vaccine or a very effective medical therapy. So this is just considered a much less serious illness. And I don't know when or whether we're going to get either of those. But I do think that in certain parts of the country, you will have you will beat the acute outbreak and you'll be able to ease off of some of the social distancing measures at some point. I mean, I don't want to put a date to it, but I think conceivably within that 4-month window of the length of the unemployment benefits. But I think that's also going to be regional. It's quite possible that you're going to have some parts of the country that remain much more shut down than others at certain times. And so you might have different needs in different parts of the country in terms of unemployment policy.
Right. And Josh, there's a last question for you, which is we saw this recent op-ed in the New York Times by two respected epidemiologists. One of the things that I think we talked about last time is that we need more testing if this were to be possible. But he's saying basically that the testing infrastructure is not there. Same with some of the other measures. And the only thing that might be available to us is epidemic intelligence, which is basically like widespread blood testing and looking at doctors' offices. Is it possible to reopen under the circumstances if we can't ramp up testing?
I didn't read that specific op-ed, unfortunately, so I don't. I mean, with the blood testing, I know people have been talking about these tests for antibodies, right? Currently we have tests that look for the virus. They figure out if you're currently infected. The hope and expectation is that once you've been infected, you have immunity from this for some period. So I guess that's what the blood testing would be for. You'd figure out who in the population is in a safe position to go back to work because they can't get the virus. But I don't know how that would help you track acute outbreaks.
Right.
Because I think you need the viral testing for that.
Right. Yeah. No, it was a strange situation where he's basically saying that so much of what we have currently, or so much of what we might need in order to get out of this may not be available in terms of our productive capacity. And so it's a bleak situation, I think.
Yeah, I see different things on that. I mean, South Korea has managed to roll out. I mean, the other question is, how many tests do you need to do surveillance depends on how big the outbreaks are. Right. I mean, what we have in the New York area right now, they're not really doing contact tracing because there's so much of the virus out there. It's really sort of hopeless to try to figure out where any individual person or where most individual people got the disease from. But if you have, if you get the outbreak under control, if you have social distancing, extreme social distancing measures for long enough that you have a much reduced number of new cases, then it becomes easier to figure that out. And you also don't need quite as many tests, I believe, in order to have a high level of surveillance because you have fewer suspected cases.
Yeah, makes sense.
Thank you, Josh.
Josh, thank you.
Joining us.
Thank you.
Next on Rising, Biden versus Cuomo. Journalist Sed Jelani, he joins us. He's going to tell us if that matchup could happen when Rising continues.